Good morning, everybody. I see we are now at 37 participants, so we'll now start that webinar. So thank you for joining and welcome to the Secoda and Mazars webinar regarding the CSRD, and specifically the topic we would like to discuss together and with you is how companies will have proceeding with selecting their CSRD auditors, including criteria, processes they might consider, and observation from the first wave of CSRD auditors' appointments. So the general background, I guess everybody by now is very much aware of the fact that CSRD and sustainability reporting is really a hot topic currently in the EU, whereby the regulators really want to strengthen the level of quality of the sustainability reporting by adding an assurance piece into that sustainability reporting. So joining with me this morning is Daniela Matthias and Emmanuel Thierry. So Daniela is a lawyer and management consultant for finance, corporate governance, and sustainability. She worked at KPMG and EY. She's today co-owner and senior board advisor of the European Center for Board Effectiveness, as well as president of the Financial Experts Association. She's a chairwoman of the Audit and Compliance Committee at Der Autobahn des Bundes, and also an independent member of various supervisory boards, including Commerzbank AG, Deutsche Bahn, Genoptik, and CEWE Stiftung & Co. And Emmanuel, on his side, is a partner with Forvis Mazars in France. Emmanuel has extensive international experience, both in the US, where he spent 7 years in New York, and in Japan for 10 years, including being the managing partner of the country for 5 years. Emmanuel is now in charge of the sustainability and CSRD practice at Forvis Mazars in Paris, based in Paris, and he's also a signatory partner for financial institutions and in charge of several NFRD reports. On my side, my name is Anne-Hélène Monselato. I'm an independent board director for companies listed in France and, well, in Europe and in the US. And I've been working for 10 years on governance matters and for 6 years on CSRD topics, following up on the various iterations of those regulations. So with this brief introduction, I would like to ask Emmanuel to do a short keynote on where audit firms are currently in that process and what difficulties do they face, so that we all understand what will be required from the auditors starting, well, pretty much in 2024. Emmanuel.
Well, thank you very much, Anne-Hélène. I'm glad to talk to you all today. So again, my name is Emmanuel Thierry. I'm with Forvis Mazars. We are coming in Europe to the end of the first wave of appointments of CSRD auditors, the first ever wave of CSRD auditors. And I think it was interesting actually to come back to a few observations which we could have from this first wave. Forvis Mazars has been appointed in a number of cases as CSRD auditor of our clients, and we've had also chances to communicate and exchange with our with other audit firms and with regulators and so on and so forth. So I think it's important to see what it means to appoint a CSRD auditor, maybe what should be looked at, and also for us to share a few observations, informal observations, which does not aim at being representative of the entire market, or which that do not aim to be statistical observations, but a few things we have observed which may be of interest to board members in the way they will be handling their new responsibilities. And I think Daniela will also touch on the question of the new responsibilities of board members, notably with regards to what auditors will be doing on the CSRD reporting. I don't have many slides, so that's what we agreed to avoid plunging into plenty of slides which are difficult to read. However, being an auditor and a consultant, I could not escape putting together a couple of them. And the first one is maybe the result of some of our observations typically. So if I can move here, yes. The result of some observations we could gather from our various offices all around Europe about the appointment of CSRD auditors. Again, this is not to be market representative. This is not weighted based on the volume of appointments or based on the economic weight of various countries. But those are a few observations which we could gather from our various offices all across Europe about how CSRD auditors have been appointed and what are the results of those appointments. Maybe a first comment, and that's obviously something quite important, is that it seems the incumbent statutory auditor, the financial auditor, is definitely in leading position to become the CSRD auditor. And what we observe in most countries is that when we are the statutory auditor, or when our competitors are the statutory auditor of companies that are subject to CSRD, they are going to be appointed as well as CSRD auditors. So basically, that means two things. That means that the option which was left to some member states and which has been elected by some member states, even so, I know that transposition is taking some time to clarify the matter in some countries, but the option to use other assurance services providers, other than the CPA who is signing off on the financial statements, has not been the main choice and has not been something that has been seen a lot or discussed a lot. So maybe that's one important observation to share. There are different reasons for that. There are a few cases where there was an alternate CPA that was that may have been appointed as financial auditors, but very few cases for this first wave, which, let's keep that in mind, we're talking about the big companies, the very large companies in Europe which are listed. There are very few cases where a non-CPA firm, as far as I know, has been appointed as CSRD auditor. And in all of our countries, all of our offices across Europe, when we have clients that will be subject to CSRD, our partners expect to be appointed CSRD auditor in wave 1 and in wave 2. Okay, so that's maybe one first comment, observation. Also, another observation, when there is a joint financial audit that is mandatory, and that's the case in some countries, including in France, most companies have also favored a joint audit solution for the audit of sustainability statements, even if it's not mandatory. So that's also an observation which is interesting about the structure of the market. One reason for this selection of the statutory auditor is the clear synergies and the perceived simplification from selecting the statutory auditors. And maybe we can debate about also some drawbacks from selecting the statutory auditors, but in terms of simplification of independence check, that's much easier, obviously. In terms of also leveraging existing knowledge of the organization and the company, that's also been one of the key drivers of choice. And let's be honest, in many cases, we have observed that the companies didn't want to go through heavy selection processes to get some new players, but decided to go to a simple solution. We have even cases where there has been an appointment of the statutory auditors without really asking the statutory auditor, do you want to be a CSRD auditor? So in some cases, the questions were not even asked. One point that is important, and Anne-Hélène was asking about it, is about the audit operating models, which are expected to be followed by the audit firms. We have observed different models across the board. Maybe to simplify, one model is when the audit is going to be performed exclusively by ESG team members, so people who only audit ESG reporting, or only do also consulting on ESG reporting. So that's one extreme. And then you have a whole range of solutions to the other extreme, where you only have people whose first job is to be a financial auditor. And that will be who will be doing the audit of sustainability statements. So that's more or less the two extreme situations that we are seeing. Obviously, it will depend on the audit firm. It will depend also on the complexity of the company. And in between, which is the mainstream case, in between, you have a mix of teams between experienced financial auditors who have been trained on ESG reporting, on ESRS typically, and ESG specialists. Typically, ESG specialists being involved on specific topics like reviewing a transition plan. You know, there are some areas where the traditional financial auditors are a little bit at a loss, to tell you the truth, and typically auditing the transition plan, so ESRS E1 from a client, that's something that is not where traditional financial auditors are not necessarily super comfortable with. So we are seeing these different cases, and I'll be happy to discuss more about our observations and what we favor. But definitely, it depends on the size, on the complexity, and so on and so forth. But we observe that it's not a one-size-fits-all, and also because audit firms are testing solutions with the resources that are available to them. There are obviously not so many resources with experience auditing ESG reporting, and therefore there is a fitting to the situations, which is also work in progress. About training of traditional auditors, maybe one point which is important to bring to the attention of board members. In a number of countries, you have mandatory trainings, mandatory hours as well of training for the traditional CPAs to be able to sign off on the sustainability statements. In France, it's 90 hours. So which means that as a CPA, I am a CPA, I am following 90 hours of mandatory training to be able, at the end of the year, to sign off on sustainability statements. So that's not the case in all countries, and it's interesting to see that in some other countries, there is nothing mandatory. In some countries, they are going towards 30 hours and so on and so forth. But what we see, the range that we are observing as well is between 0 hours and 90 hours of mandatory training. So those are first few observations about how audit firms are getting ready for the audit, and what have been the selection, or what have been the results of the selection of CSRD auditors. But maybe I should leave it to Daniela to further comment before talking about more the selection process which we have observed.
No, thank you, Emmanuel. I think you highlighted a lot of topics which I also have in my mind, and I think we will talk about later on which kind of different options do we have for selecting an auditor and which kind of auditor we are looking for when it comes to sustainability reporting. So yeah, I don't know if we just should jump into the discussion already, Anne-Hélène.
Well, maybe what we can do, Daniela, as you're reacting, maybe it's a good idea, because technically the CSRD has provided with 3 options: either appointing the statutory auditors, another audit firm, or an independent service provider. And I understood in the discussion we had in preparing for that webinar that Germany has not yet transposed the CSRD, and there is this is a hot topic on whether or not you would allow the 3 options. So would you have what are the key considerations that they have in Germany currently regarding this debate?
So yes, you're right, Anne-Hélène. We are currently in the process of implementing the CSRD in Germany, and we have 2 options in the current draft. The one option is that the sustainability report can either be carried out by the auditor of the current financial reporting, so means our statutory auditor, or by another auditor from the audit profession. So that means, so we are currently in the draft not open for different service provider. But however, we are getting signals from Berlin that there are plans to open the auditing of the sustainability report for other certified service provider, such as lawyer, tax consulting, and so on. And this is this discussion is still going on. And it's currently, I would say, very hot. Yeah, so there are mainly, I would say, two reasons for that. Firstly, and I think you will agree also, Emmanuel, there is a shortage of resources among the auditors already, and especially when it comes to adding the sustainability report, the audit of the sustainability report. And in the second step, this is maybe something which doesn't concern me so much in respect, as an audit committee chair, is the fear of the market concentrations among the big four. But coming to the shortage of resources is that the audit profession as a whole, that's my observation, does not have the human capacity to fulfill the requirements associated to the auditing of the sustainability report, and especially advising the preparation in the way if it's necessary. In Germany, we have round about 15,000 auditors, which are currently available. These are the numbers by January this year. And we have approximately, I would say, also around about 50,000 companies which need an auditor for sustainability reporting. This shows you already that we have there is huge mismatch, but there are, and that is the reason why there are demands to open these auditing to other professions. I'm maybe a little bit hesitating to say, okay, let's give it to like lawyers, which have a completely different methodology to in their profession. So, but this is something which we currently discuss.
Thank you. Maybe I can bounce back on that and the question for Emmanuel. What do you see across the EU in terms of selection process and criteria? Because in a sense, criteria for audit firms, criteria if you are, I would say, with the material topic regarding human rights, you might want to have a law firm involved in the process. So what do you see currently in terms of criteria in the process?
Well, I think one of the first criteria, you're making a reference, Anne-Hélène, to a qualitative assessment of the candidates. It's not necessarily always been the clear discussion, to tell you the truth. There has been a lot of discussion around pricing, and we'll come back to that later on. But pricing has been a key concern from many clients. And the other concern was having a simple solution. Because obviously for clients, for all companies around Europe, moving towards a stronger ESG reporting, which is the ambition of CSRD, is a big challenge. And therefore, in many cases, we have observed that the companies didn't want to have the burden of this CSRD project, which is definitely a challenge, and at the same time ask themselves plenty of questions with independence of the candidates for the audit and so on and so forth. And that's why, in many cases, the statutory auditor has been selected as well. So simplification of the process has been a key concern. Pricing has been another concern. And obviously, the technical capability of the audit firm. But I will say, to be honest, based on my observations, it's not come at first in all cases. Also because we're talking about the very large PIE firms in Europe. And let's be honest, they are the auditors, the natural auditors, if you want, of those very large PIE firms in this first wave. We are talking about 6-7 firms, audit networks. We are not talking about, and those 6-7 firms, in most cases, they have capabilities I would say, or they are developing capabilities, even so there is a shortage of resources and appropriate resources, as Daniela was mentioning, but all of them have some relevance on the topic. So the question of quality and availability of experts has not necessarily come first in the selection process.
Okay, so this would explain why you don't see yet a configuration of appointments, which could be one audit firm and another assurance service provider, no audit firm and one or more assurance service providers outside of the audit market, traditional audit market yet. Correct. For that first wave, at least. And
also it's creating many conflicts. I mean, I think for many companies, it's already complicated to manage their auditors in terms of conflict management and avoiding them providing consulting services and so on and so forth. If you take another player in the room, including law firms, that's creating another level of difficulties. And actually in France, where law firms are allowed as well as independent service providers, as far as I know, there are not that many that have elected to go this way.
Okay, so you don't see that as a trend for wave 2, for example. Okay, thank you very much.
Then, it could be different for different sizes of clients. That's my observation for wave 1, but for different sizes of clients, we could see alternative providers to some extent. But I can see that Daniela may have a different view on the topic.
No, I'm completely with you. I know that also the auditors have to evaluate their technical and their skills in respect to sustainability reporting. So we all are at a learning curve. So as also the auditors. But what I see is, and when it comes especially to listed companies, I would say the methodology skills which an auditor brings, also not only in respect to compare the standards, that means the European sustainability reporting standards, which the written report, but also getting all the validity of the data to ensure that the processes are effective, to have a proper EKS, or that means internal controls on these on all these processes. This is a methodology which you learn as an auditor, and my concerns are if this might be really easy to learn for other professions. I'm a lawyer, but my whole life I was dealing with auditors. So the difference is in a way huge.
No, I definitely, if that's all right with you, Hélène, that I jump on this, because I think Daniela is raising a very good point, which is, first of all, auditing, and this is also a special, it's not only about accounting or what the subject of our procedures, but auditing as such, it's a specialty. And second, that to be able to do the CSRD audit, typically, you need a very wide range of specialties. So you were talking about internal control systems, but that's true also obviously for information systems, and many companies are rolling out new ERPs for ESG reporting. So that will require also some attention and some IT experts looking at it. We are engaging on our CSRD audits climate experts. So I was giving the example earlier on the transition plans. So typically a transition plan, the traditional financial auditor is a bit has a long way to go before being completely expert. So we need, in my mind, to be honest, that's a validation of the multidisciplinary model that we have in most audit networks, where you can get to come together quickly various skills and expertise to be able to address those topics, which are very different, because pollution, it's a very different topic from climate, and it's also very different from the social issues.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's something which will be which will be very, very interesting to see, and we do not have yet the information on that. The sensitivity of investors to whatever type whether it be traditional audit firms doing sustainability, well, the sustainability opinion, or other service providers. And for wave one, it will be largely consistent with what was done in the past, because a certain number of those large companies already had some form of opinion on this NFRD reporting. It will be clear for wave two. We'll first have, you know, a variety probably, and then some trends will appear after careful analysis. Another question to you, Daniela, because during you mentioned auditors' liability in Germany, which was also a topic discussed regarding a sustainability opinion. And I was very interested with the discussion. So can you tell us more on that as well, please?
Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I do. And it might be when I was reflecting our preparation call that it's maybe a German topic, because the liability of the statutory auditor was and is limited by law to a certain amount, provided we are talking about misconduct that is not based on intent. As a consequence of the Wirecard scandal or the Wirecard topic, the German legislator has tightened the liability of auditors and reduced the limitation of the liability and increased the liability amounts. So, and now we have a demand or a discussion from the auditors profession to reflect this once again in respect to the audit of the sustainability report. And the demand is, or the ask is of the profession that they would very much welcome that a kind of reduction of this amount of liability for this specific type of audit. What I personally can understand, but what I would like to highlight, and this concerns me a little bit more, is a completely other another perspective in respect to liability and responsibility for the sustainability report. The CSRD and also the German implementation law stipulate the reasonable assurance does not have to be provided until the fiscal year 2028. And therefore, we have a so-called phase-in for the auditor. And the reason for this, we all know, it's because the availability and quality of data, as well the quality of a data collection process, and I spoke also about internal control systems, all that must be established, and the auditor is not really, I would say, able or cannot really rely sufficiently on processes, and has to do a completely, I would say, different work than it's common in the financial audit. But my point in that respect is that all these arguments from the phase-in for the sustainability reporting is not only demanded for the auditors, it's also demanded for those people. I'm thinking on the executive management who has to establish and to write the sustainability report. And also we as audit committees members, we have to make sure that our data are not only aligned with the European reporting standards, there also needs to be valid. And my concerns is, or my question is, if there is a chance to get also a kind of phase-in phase for the audit committees and for executive management until we have a mandatory reasonable assurance, not only limited assurance, a reasonable assurance. And this is something which I would really like to see in the discussion in Germany.
Well, I think it's a very interesting topic, definitely this question of the learning curve and the whole market, you know, everybody in the market, being the audit firms, management, audit committees, all the committee in charge of sustainability reporting, regulators of the audit firms, and so on. Everybody will be on the investors, rating agencies will be on a learning curve in terms of you know, understanding the information. What does it mean? How it's been reviewed? And Emmanuel, you will take us through you know, the various stages between limited assurance, current opinion, because we don't have a standard currently, limited assurance when the standard will be adopted in the EU, and then reasonable assurance if the EU so choose to have reasonable assurance, and that would not happen before 2028, as Daniela, you mentioned. But definitely in terms of audit committees, as you might remember in the CSRD, what audit committees or the committee in charge of the sustainability reporting have requirements, duties, which are similar to the audit committee regarding the financial reporting. So we're supposed to understand and provide some oversight regarding preparation of the sustainability reporting, same regarding internal control and risk management over the sustainability reporting. So all this has been mirrored. Extent of involvement over these matters from the audit committee or the committee in charge really should be enhanced, much enhanced compared to what it was just for INFRD reporting last year, for example. So
maybe one comment. I definitely understand Daniela's concern, especially because with the CSRD, the ESG reporting explicitly is addressed to new kind of stakeholders, NGOs and others, you know, basically all the stakeholders you can imagine. And that comes together with CS3D or the LKSV in Germany, or you have also the duty of vigilance in France. So it's a new framework which is basically imposing more responsibilities on the board members, while in terms of maturity of the reporting process, in terms of maturity of the assurance process as a whole, not only from the external auditors, but even from internal auditors, for instance, that's not completely there. We feel that people who know about CSRD, who have been involved with the CSRD process, including regulators, have a certain understanding of this need for a journey. And that's really the concept of CSRD, by the way, that it's a journey. And that's why we start with limited assurance and we go to reasonable assurance. It's a journey that is aiming at a progressive, gradual improvement of the quality of the reporting. That being said, and I understand the concern from Daniela, indeed, the auditors, the external auditors, have a kind of protection because they have a limited assurance level, but it does not really apply to the board members, because if there is a scandal, and there will be scandals, there will be NGOs or others or regulators, and that's their job, that will be pointing to the fact that this information is incorrect, that this information should have been reported and was not, and that there is also greenwashing, because greenwashing will be a big topic, I think, in the next few years. So it's true that to some extent, this concept of best effort basis, which I think is a necessary step anyway for the board members. From a legal point of view, that's not, as far as I know, completely clear for the board member responsibility. So how do you do that? Well, I think training, and I think, Anne-Hélène, you were talking about the learning curve. I think if you don't have mandatory training for your board members, well, you're not showing the best effort, because nobody is really familiar with CSRD these days, with CSRS and so on. That's the reality. So if you don't have your board going through a formal training, well, it's difficult for you to show that you've done your best effort to have them aware of their responsibilities and so on and so forth. So there are a number of steps that can be taken to protect the board from potential liabilities.
Yeah, indeed. I totally concur with your point regarding board members training regarding this, but this will never be to the extent where they are able to understand, all the requirements. But still, there is a very important topic, and Emmanuel, you will take us through that in terms of what the auditors are supposed to do, knowing that the materiality assessment performed by management, reviewed and agreed upon by the committee in charge, and then the board, and then reviewed by the auditors. And you were mentioning greenwashing, but if the auditors say nothing, in terms of compliance, and does not do a sufficiently thorough job in terms of looking at the materiality assessment by management, there it goes that in terms of responsibility, you can have shared responsibility. But coming back to that very important topic, we have no standard yet issued in the EU regarding this limited assurance that we have to have on the sustainability reporting. So nothing has been released. However, there is a proposed IASB ISA 5000, which is for comments and which should be finalized by year-end 2024. And France also has adopted an interim standard, which is translated into English, which can be of interest. So if you can take us through the procedures that will be performed by the auditors for the first wave and possibly second, pending adoption of a limited assurance standard in the EU.
Thank you, Anne-Hélène, for pointing out that indeed the auditors can be blamed for a lot of things, but in this specific case, they don't even have a framework that is completely clear with which they should be, they will have to work with. However, there are a few things maybe that we can look at. So we've put together that presentation we were doing for some clients, basically comparing the current situation, which were in all of Europe, even where it was not mandatory, because let's keep in mind that assurance was not mandatory in most countries in Europe. It was done on a voluntary basis. In Germany, I know that many firms have been doing it on a voluntary basis, which is different than having that as a regulation, like in France or in Italy or in Spain, where there is a full framework that has been developed for ESG assurance. One quick difference, for instance, if I may, is that when it's on a voluntary basis, you may also decide at the end that the result is not good enough for you to publish it. That has happened, right? That's something that we've observed. When it's regulatory, usually, well, you don't have a choice. You need to have the audit report that is being published. In any case, today, the audit standards are derived from ISA 3000 for the purpose of NFRD audits. And as we can see on this slide and on the next one, the scope of the work was quite different. First of all, the extent of what we had to check was also quite different. In terms of IROs, which many of you may be familiar with now, but what is coming from the double materiality assessment exercise, historically, we were really looking at risk. So that's what auditors were really looking at. And that was limited to the company. The value chain was not necessarily within the scope of what we were checking. Same thing.
Maybe yes. For the audience, IROs, it's impact risk opportunities as part of the SRS.
Correct. Which is, again, a cornerstone of the double materiality assessment that the company now needs to do to be able to put together its sustainability statements. So historically, that was quite limited, the extent of work we were doing on this information, and the information we had to review was also limited. Same thing in terms of standardization. There was quite not that much to be done because there were no standards that were mandatory. Many were using GRI, were using different frameworks to disclose their information, but it was all voluntary, and therefore there was always a lot of flexibility in terms of what was to be reported. Now, obviously, we have the ESRS. And with the ESRS, we all know we have more than 1,000 data points that may be produced by the companies, both on the impact side and on the financial side, and they need to be checked or looked at with different levels of depth depending on their materiality, obviously. This thing is also a very big change, and also the expectation from the current ISA 5000 standard is that the depth of the work we will have to do will be much deeper than what we were doing with ISA 3000, including in terms of formalization of the work. And that's something that's obviously quite important, including on the understanding the entity, understanding the internal control environment, which is a key concept also under CSRD. And that will be even more when we move towards reasonable assurance workload, by the way. So that's something that we need to keep in mind. And that's an impact on the reporting. That's an impact also on the work to be done by auditors. Again, if we move to other types of concepts, comparing the current situation and what's coming up with ISA 5000, in terms of analytical procedures, that was relatively light, what was done for the purpose of ISA 3000, while under ISA 5000 framework, that's going to be much deeper. So it's always a step further. And by the way, in analytical procedures, that means also that the company needs to make sure that they understand what they are reporting on and that they compare and they can control it. So the introduction of controlling will be also quite an important step for the companies to make some progress along the way. Internal control, I think I've been talking about that as well. We are not at this stage anticipating to do in-depth internal control testing on the ESG reporting environment. One reason being that it's still relatively light. It's not really formalized. When we are talking to clients about internal control, well, they say, oh yeah, I'm controlling that. Okay, do you formalize? Can we check that control? Oh yeah, but I'm just doing it, you know. So it's like going back 10 or 15, 20 years in financial reporting where the controls were there and the concept of formalizing the controls was the auditors are bothering us with that. That's been the experience. I think now we're going to move towards something more formal and with also a vision where the control environment will have to be formalized, will have to be tested internally and externally, and will help to move forward later on. About control, by the way, and that's not exactly the same topic, but to limit or to mitigate the responsibility and the liabilities for the board members, Daniela, I believe it's also quite important that the audit committees typically make sure that the audit plan of the internal audit includes a consideration of the ESG reporting. Because otherwise, how can the internal audit have sufficient comfort, sufficient information, sufficient data to have an opinion on the double materiality assessment that has been produced by the company, or to the adequacy and the appropriateness of the information that is being produced by the company. The audit committee should not have to rely on the external auditors. It should have also its own sources of information, and typically that's the internal audit. So having in the audit plan 2024, so that's actually now, right? That's a challenge. Having in the audit plan of the internal audit function, the ESG reporting being covered, first of all, with the double materiality assessment, but there are other topics to be addressed. I think that's one of the mitigating factors in terms of responsibility for internal audit and showing that you are doing your best efforts. Obviously, sustainability report review is also one task that we will have to do a bit more in depth with the new role, as was pointed out, of the audit committee and of the board at large. And the last point, which is very important, is the connectivity with the financial information. This is not something that was really looked at in details in the past. Now, let's not forget that in the sustainability statement, we have also the taxonomy information. so which is changing in terms of responsibility as well, of who is looking at it and for what purpose. But also there is an explicit requirement of a linkage between the ESG information and the financial information. The CapEx that are projected by the company for the energy transition, for instance, should be consistent with the CapEx capabilities and the financing capabilities of the company and so on and so forth. So many new topics which are going to be looked at with much more attention than in the past.
Yeah, thank you, Emmanuel. I think that was very clear, and definitely the last point you made regarding connectivity of the sustainability reporting and the financial reporting is a very important topic, and this might, in terms of selecting the statutory auditors, might be another argument for companies to consider whether it can facilitate. I see Daniela is objecting, but before giving you the floor, Daniela, we have a series of 3 questions in the question and answers. Somebody asked a question regarding who is responsible for the selection of the auditor. And definitely it's not the executive management or the CFO, it's the audit committee or the committee in charge of the sustainability reporting. This is very clear in the CSRD. Ankalupu asked a question regarding the extent of what the auditor should do. And Emmanuel, if you can take a few minutes to read exactly and respond to that. And then we have a question, and this will be the next question to Emmanuel and then to Daniela regarding the prices that you see in the market. Emmanuel, you were mentioning that there were a lot of discussions around prices. I know in France it's the same, and it's a very difficult topic. If we look at your table, NFRD, limited assurance under ISA 5000, reasonable assurance under ISA 5000, this is an exposure draft. It's not yet released. We can see that the number of black dots is increasing steadily. So if you want to comment on that first, the question was, do we have a range of average expected costs for limited assurance? Is there any public source of information where we can find reasonable estimates? So your views on that.
So I'm not aware of any public source of information with regards to CSRD audit cost, to tell you the truth. I'm pretty clear that some associations of CSOs or of chief sustainability officers are sharing information and are comparing information. A few comments maybe on the question of cost. First, it's been a key topic of discussion between the auditors and the companies, because obviously costs have to be managed, and that's very understandable. And sometimes the additional value was not completely clear of having something audited, also because the risk related to this additional information, this new information, was not completely understood, including by some CFOs who were not familiar with the subjects. About the costs themselves, if we go back 12 months or actually 18 months, there was a study that was mandated, commissioned by the EFRAG. And this study, based on surveys, had led to an estimate of limited assurance cost to be between 20 and 30% of the consolidated financial audit cost. Okay, so that was kind of what everybody had in mind. And the reason for this 20-30% was actually a misunderstanding or a misconception or lack of information about the limited assurance concept. Because typically when there is a limited assurance half-year review, for instance, which is usually under a limited assurance framework, the cost of the half-year review is also 20-30% of the total financial audit fees. What we observe is that, first of all, the cost as a percentage of the financial audit fees, the cost is decreasing with the size of the company. So basically, the bigger the company, the smaller the percentage of CSRD audit fees. There are several reasons for that. One reason is that a lot of the work is actually done centrally. So instead of asking plenty of component auditors to do the work all over the place, including in the US where audit costs are very high, a lot of the work is done centrally. And to some extent, since there is no local statutory audit requirements, there is limited work that may be done locally. So that's one reason, a more central approach, which is consistent also with the approach of the clients, of the companies. Companies have a much more central approach to production of ESG information than what they do for financial information, because for financial information, you have also local statutory requirements. CSRD, it's only for the entire group. Okay, so that's one first observation. Then, in terms of, but for mid-size or smaller size companies, those central costs and this fixed cost that we have to do for the double materiality assessment, for instance, they remain there. So that's why the bigger the company, the lower the cost. We are not at 20-30%, except in some countries where audit costs are usually higher. We are a little lower than this 20-30% in most cases, and much lower when we are talking about very large groups. So that's maybe the kind of percentage or the indicator in terms of fees that I can share. We are seeing huge pressure in some cases because the competition exists. Essentially in France, where I'm based, with a joint audit system, there has been a clear approach to create competition between the joint auditors as well to get the best price possible. That's part of the game, and that's part of the benefits of joint audit is having a better control around audit fees. But that's been relatively effective, and I'm pretty sure that France will end up with audit fees, relatively speaking, lower than in some other countries.
Well,
third, was there a formal tender, for instance, a formal process of selection of auditors? Not always. So that's obviously has been driving the cost between the different countries. When there was a formal tender process, obviously everybody has been trying to be more competitive. When there was okay, we just take our statutory auditor and that's it. Obviously, it's a more personal negotiation.
Well, thank you, Emmanuel. I'm not sure that joint audit is really putting pressure on audit fees in France, but that's a personal view. Daniela, if you could react to these topics of regarding audit fees, because technically, you know, the audit committee or the committee in charge, but if we take by analogy the audit committee, you know, the lower the audit fees, the greater the responsibility for the audit committee in terms of having requested lower audit fees in case there is, you know, a misstatement, a large misstatement or a fraud and so on. He could be found liable for having pressured the auditors into lower audit fees. So by analogy, regarding all those topics we were discussing, greenwashing, you know, having to review the materiality, what would be your views regarding the pricing of sustainability reporting and I would say trends that would just look at those engagements purely from a pricing standpoint, who would get the lower pricing? So your views on the pricing, please.
Okay, I try to answer that because I have a little or slightly different view than Emmanuel, because what I see in the pricing of auditing the sustainability report, I see much lower numbers currently. So they might change in the future, but when I compare the part of the cost for financial auditing and for the sustainability auditing currently, I would say it's around about 10% or maybe 12% of the financial numbers. It's much less. the question of pricing, I think it's a general question. How you react as an audit committee in respect to pricing. And honestly, as an audit committee member and an audit committee chair, I'm not motivated to get the auditor with the lowest price. So this is, and that is, I think it's also fair part of the company and of the CFO, who has to take care about the costs. And this is his part in the debate in the team who is selecting, or the team which is selecting the auditor. So we are a team. So I'm responsible for the high quality in that process, in the independence, and there for sure is an efficiency and the cost issue as well. And this is something which has come up from the company. And then we are debating, you know. So for me, it's clear when I'm sitting in the board, especially in an audit committee as a chair, the price will never has more than 30% of the selection criteria. Mm-hmm. And I'm completely clear on that.
To your point, Daniela, and I agree, by the way, with the kind of estimate you were talking about, which is quite valid for large companies, a bit less for smaller entities. But to your point, and that's one of the comments I had here, according to the little survey we've done, the most influential person in selecting the CSRD auditors has been the CFO, which is also consistent with a change in responsibility. Before, prior to CSRD, it was really clear that the CSO typically was in charge of ESG reporting. Now he still has a responsibility for sure, but the CFO has jumped in as well. That's what we have observed in many clients. And that's why I was not surprised when my partners in many countries were reporting that the most influential person in the selection of the auditors was the CFO.
Sorry,
may I just can react on that? So for me, it's the selection of the sustainability auditor, the same process as for the statutory auditor. So I have a team, and when I'm aiming to have the same auditor for the sustainability report and for the financial report, I have people in my nomination team, which is the CFO, it's the audit committee chair, other committees. It's a CSO, that means the person who is responsible for sustainability, and also for sure today I have the CIO or the DTO in the team, because the audit of the of IT is it's also a huge part of the task of the financial and also the sustainability auditor, and each of them has their view in selecting the auditor. So for me, the selection of the sustainability auditor should follow the same procedure as a financial auditor. And if I also see, maybe I can add it, that one provider is not such as good in financial audit as in sustainability audit, I'm flexible to say, so I have two auditors. And I wouldn't do that, or I would prefer to have one, especially when it comes to listed companies, because the processes are much leaner than if you have if you have two processes, one for the financial and a sustainability report. It might be a little bit complex, especially when you are in a rush, if you have specific demands in respect to the to the capital market. But if you are not listed, if you are in the private environment or government owned, so you can handle it, you know.
Indeed, but we are also private, listed or non-listed companies. We are in the remit of the accounting directive, and the appointment of the auditors, financial auditors, sustainability auditors, is the responsibility of the audit committee or the committee in charge of the sustainability reporting. So that's really clear. And I guess the pricing topic will depend a lot First year, it's always difficult. You know, you don't know how the company has prepared for that, the quality of the documentation, the quality of the materiality assessment, the quality of the consultation process for stakeholders, and so on. So a lot will be dependent on that. And we might have this first year exercise, which is a little bit on the gray zone uncertainty. And then second year will be, so first year exercise for first wave companies might not have all, you know, the lessons learned. Second year exercise for first year company will be of interest, but the one with the most of interest will be second year exercise for second wave companies. Here we'll have really, I think, some truth in the numbers.
If I may, Anne-Hélène, on your point, I think it's a very good reminder indeed. This is the first year. And I've had this discussion with some clients when talking about pricing, but also talking about what we have to do. And at the end of the day, nobody has yet really produced a sustainability report according to the CSRD, to ESRS and the CSRD directive. And nobody has audited either a CSRD report. I mean, we are all doing our dry runs and tests and so on in each audit firm. But at the end of the day, going through to the end and be able to say, well, that's correct, that's sufficient, that's not sufficient. Nobody has really done that. And we have also, considering the fact that we don't have final standards that tell us what to do, and that the clients don't know yet, in many cases, how they will be reporting their information and who will really be in charge. I mean, that's the reality. Everybody is work in progress. So that's why in the budget assessments, I've seen so many discussions, why this, why that, and so on. And that was interesting. But at the end of the day, it's there is a bit of maybe that will go that way, maybe that will go the other way. So a need for a lot of trust, I believe, and transparency between the auditor and the auditee in order to find reasonable solutions for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. And what you mentioned, it's technically for that first year up until 2028, if the EU so chooses, it's a limited assurance. It's not yet an audit. It's purely limited assurance. So a very reduced scope of work. So definitely, this is the discussion is pretty much open and in the air of where that will land. And I totally agree with you. We should be prepared as audit committees or committee ad hoc to have substantial discussions afterwards, after that exercise, you know, the full cycle, and do, you know, a retrospective assessment of where we are compared to where we were initially and what we were expecting. So that will be a very interesting exercise, post-mortem exercise to be done afterwards.
Very important. And I hear what Daniela is saying with gathering all the team to make the selection and having the opinion of this and that. I've seen as well cases where you are basically the CFO asking a price to the auditors, and if it's a little high, so there is a little negotiation, and then it's set, the auditor is going to be appointed, including for listed companies. It has happened, and it's not best practice. What Daniela was describing is probably best practice with a formal tender process, typically. But in our little internal survey, maybe less than, or a bit more than half have gone through a formal consultation process. There are also a number of cases where it's been a quick decision.
Yes, indeed. But in terms of directors' responsibility, you ought to not leave that in the hands of the management, because in the end, although it's limited assurance, it's still assurance. You have a huge responsibility, as Daniela was pointing out initially, regarding, you know, responsibility of management, responsibility of the board regarding what information will be released. You mentioned 1,000 plus data points. It will be lower than that, obviously, because you have the materiality assessment. But still, in terms of what you select to disclose at the level of the company that the board will approve, you have full responsibility here. So you were discussing greenwashing, disagreements, and so on, and possible litigation afterwards, which might arise in terms of materiality disclosed or not disclosed. In the end, the companies and the governance bodies at the companies are responsible. So making sure that we have a robust limited assurance at first engagement conducted over these informations really is very important for the governance bodies, directors and management included. Daniela, your views?
Yes, and in the ideal world, you will have the attitude, or you have to have the attitude, and also as the ambition as the audit committee, to choose your sustainability auditor also for these 10 years in a listed in a listed environment as the financial auditor. So that means, so you have to have a little bit, you know, look into the future. Is the auditor also able to get these learning curve done, you know? So you are sitting a little bit with him in I would say in the same car.
Yeah, it's a marriage. It's a marriage. Whether you like it or not, you're there for 10 years or more.
Yeah, that's true. And that was the reason why we choose in several situations, in listed companies, in government-owned companies, and also in a private company. We said, okay, let's do the process in the same way, also with the same attitude and ambition in respect to quality and especially to independence, which is also a huge issue. I think also for the sustainability auditor, especially in the first years, because all the companies do not really know so how to get the task done, you know, and that it's quite natural that they then go to the auditor and say, okay, listen, so how can I do this and this? So that means the border between advising and auditing, so it's very close.
It's a tough nail. That's why the learning curve. Thank you for all these discussions. I'd like to take the opportunity to ask to the audience if they have questions. If you want to put those in the question and responses thread.
Maybe just one quick comment before I go on the questions, on-cast questions. On what Daniela just said, that's also something we observe, that when there is a need to change or a willingness to change the auditor, that the new tenders will include both. So the tender documentation, and when we go through a real formal tender, and that there is a need to replace the financial auditor, typically nowadays, I think the thought process is, okay, we're looking at both sides, so ESG reporting and financial reporting, and ideally the selection will go with one auditor covering both set of statements. That's also something that we observe indeed.
Thank you, Emmanuel. In the absence of questions from the audience,
there is still a question on the DMA, I believe, and a few questions like that.
Yes, you want to address the questions regarding additional what the auditor should do from ONCA?
Yes, so very quickly, maybe a few comments on that, and that's quite important, starting with the double materiality assessment. This is something that is explicitly going to be part of our reporting, because this is something that is anticipated in the CSRD, that the auditor has to express an opinion, a view on the double materiality assessment. So the way to do it is going, however, to be not necessarily on the results of the double materiality assessment, but on the appropriateness of the process. So which means, again, we were talking about formal controls and formal processes earlier on, which means that the expectation from the auditor is that there is a really formal process using also a benchmark and so on and so forth, and the proper level of review, typically ideally with the audit committee involved in internal audit, to make sure that the double materiality assessment leads to an appropriate conclusion. The focus is already on the process, but if you look at the process and you completely disregard the results, you've not really been looking properly. So obviously every auditor is going to look at the results as well to check that his understanding was correct. Looking at one procedure, typically, which was not necessarily something done a lot in financial audit, but which I believe we will be doing a lot more in ESG audit, is benchmarking. Because that's also one of the key objectives of CSRD, which is to create comparability between the companies, right? Which was not the case before. So the benchmarking exercise, which is expected from the companies when they do their DMA, that's also something that we will be using, I believe, in assessing the results of the double materiality assessment exercise. So that was for the first question. With regards to the question about will the auditor verify all the data and traceability too? The answer is no, even so the standards are not complete. But we are under a limited assurance framework, so which means also that it's a negative assurance. So the focus will be not on bringing a positive confirmation that everything is correct, but will be really at finding out what could go wrong and what are the most risky areas where there could be mistakes and issues. So not everything will be tested, and not everything will be tested with the same depth. In some cases, that may be interviews, inquiries, and because of the materiality and the significance of the disclosure, that may be sufficient. In some other cases, there will be an actual test of details because it has been assessed as being a risky or very exposed area. Okay, so it will depend on the type of information. And again, as Anne-Hélène was pointing out, we are still working with exposure graphs. So the depth of our procedures is and the work effort is still being defined by the profession right now. The next question is, will the auditor check all the documents where the data comes, quantity, quality, proxy, rounding of numbers, calculation, and so on and so forth? Same answer, it will depend. The depth of our procedures will depend on the materiality of the information and of the risk assessment that the auditor will be, of the conclusion of the risk assessment. If it's a high risk area, there will be more tests. If it's considered to be a low risk area, there will probably be a less test. But obviously, we will be also checking and considering the validity of the proxies and the sources of the information that is being used for estimates. Because that's one thing, a lot of external information is going to be used to calculate and to also report on the disclosure requirements. We need to check and consider and discuss with companies whether this information is the best one for the specific case of the business model of the company. And the existence of documentation, physical systems on site, etc., whether or not the reality, the existence will be checked. Well, in many cases, yes, but same answer. It will depend on the risk assessment.
Thank you, Emmanuel. That was a very detailed answer. We have another question from Leda regarding the sort of training that audit committees should take. Daniela, if you want to pick up that one.
Yeah, sure. I think in nearly every audit committee or a supervisory board or amongst non-executive directors, we have at least a kind of, I would say, education. So in every of my companies where I serve in a board, we have established several sections or several sessions, for with sustainability topics, starting from strategy to risk and also to deep dive reporting. So Anne-Helene, you mentioned that I'm also chairing the German Financial Expert Association. We have established for our members an ESG bootcamp, which is focused on the European sustainability reporting standards. So it's not only a one-day education, it's several days where we go deep dive in each reporting standard, and where we learn from other companies how they do the materiality analysis, how they combine the new CSRD with the EU taxonomy. What does it mean ESEF for the company in respect to sustainability report? From my personal standpoint is, if you are serving in an audit committee, you have to go deep. So as I have learned IFRS in a very intensive way, and I think the ambition must be to get in a way in these European sustainability reporting standard in the same way. I know it's a lot of work, but personally, I always have the feeling otherwise I'm not, there is something which I miss, you know? So I want to have the same level of discussions about sustainability reporting with the auditor and with the company as I do in respect to financial reporting. Otherwise, I don't feel comfortable personally as an audit committee chair.
No, definitely. That's a very good point. A lot of questions in the thread mentioning the trainings and where. So somebody is asking, Emmanuel, if you could comment very quickly on the sources or providers of the training currently. And I guess it's very much internal training put together with your experts or additional experts, but I'll let you answer on that. And somebody else asking on some references for examples of good ESG internal audit programs. So maybe we will pick up that one very quickly before we wrap up the session. Emmanuel?
Maybe just to confirm as well, the 90 hours, this is for CPAs in France to be able to be authorized to sign off on the sustainability statements, right? So just to put that in perspective, is for me, typically as an audit partner, to be authorized to sign off on the sustainability statements. For this specifically, so it's addressed to auditors. The CPA Institute in France is delivering approvals for training organizations to deliver these approved training schemes. And each big audit firm is developing their own training schemes, very often relying on something that is done by the Institute of CPAs in France. And because there are 5 or 6 CPA firms that participate in elaborating this training for the Institute of CPAs in France. So Forvis Mazars is one of them. So obviously we have also been approved as one of the training providers for auditors. We are also doing, and that may be one response to the next question, we are also doing trainings for clients, but very often it's something that is being tailored to the specific cases, because you have 2 types of trainings, actually, when you think about it. For CSRD, you have the general one, and it's available a bit everywhere, and it's general comments about what is CSRD, what are the requirements, what are the 12 standards, blah, 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 blah. And then the value added is more in tailoring the trainings to the specific needs of the company. So typically, if your company is in real estate, well, that's going to be the question about, okay, what are the specific issues that may pop up in the real estate industry. Biodiversity is going to be a topic, for instance, because you're going to look at the biodiversity footprint of real estate. But the rest of the workers in the value chain may not always be a critical issue. So that's why then it has to be narrowed down and tailored to each industry.
No, definitely. I think the benchmarking, and we'll see that more and more as we progress over the years, the benchmarking between companies in the same sectors will be of a lot of interest. Very last question to wrap up this very interesting discussion. So take away that audit committees or the committee in charge of selecting the auditors will have to consider resources, capacity, bandwidth, competencies, mandatory training, content of mandatory training, and also the operating model that the would-be auditor is proposing. Obviously, you mentioned the simple solution is going with your statutory auditors, but you might want, as an audit committee, to open up a little bit in terms of expertise, depending on how you probe the expertise of your statutory auditors. You mentioned price, but obviously price should not be the only determinant in terms of selecting. What about looking to other criteria for selection, which could be in the area of how audit firms plan to rely on companies, experts, and internal analysis regarding materiality or what they are doing, for example. If you have those very specific experts on very specific areas, would there be a way of having the external auditors relying on some of these very detailed, probably outside experts of the company? So that could be one of the topic for discussions in selecting an auditor. Also, what about disagreements? There will be, you mentioned, Emmanuel, a lot of discussions happening where we are near the issuance of the opinions. So what will be the process to discuss those disagreements and, make sure that we all agree and concur? So those topics for discussion in the selection process could be of interest as well. So I wanted to hear you two, maybe start with Daniela. So on those additional topics and criteria for selection beyond price and be it a simple solution, and the key messages that you would have for the audience. Daniela.
No, I'm happy to repeat what I said already. So I try to set up the selection process as in the same way as I do it for the financial statutory auditor. Quality, independence are the two main topics and the criteria. I know there is not the same level on quality and education in the audit firms as for the financial audit, but for me it's important if the team which is proposing, if those people and those auditors have at least 5, 6, or 7 years experience in respect to the non-financial report, and are not a consultant or auditors which are just jumping into the topic 2 years ago. And if I don't see that qualification in a team of our financial statutory auditor, I would choose as another audit firm for the sustainability report. That's
Thank you. Loud and clear. Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you for the emphasis on the quality of the audit. Emmanuel, you want to add something?
I definitely agree with Daniela on the need to make sure that in the proposed audit team that will be reviewing the sustainability statements, attention should be paid to not having only recycled financial auditors. Even so, financial auditors are very flexible people and able to do plenty of things. But I believe that having people who have been also focusing a certain amount of time on specific ESG matters is an important piece of quality to deliver the audit. And also, and that's an important thing to keep in mind, it's also an important piece of relevance of the auditor, because the auditor essentially in these years where things are being set up, where many people, including the auditors, are a bit at a loss sometimes about, okay, what should we do? What is the right thing? What is the wrong thing? And so on and so forth. Having people with who have taken the time to focus exclusively on ESG matters allows to have more interesting discussions and much better discussions about finding the right disclosures for the purpose of the sustainability statements. So I think it's important indeed to have teams that really focus on ESG, and not only the historical financial auditors who on the side is going to check also a few ESG KPIs. So it's important to have this, which means that the audit firms are doing, and they are doing it, need to do a lot of investments in building out those teams. There are not so many ESG auditors on the market, so there is also a bit of flexibility. But at least when you have people who focus exclusively on ESG matters, they have a bit of perspective on each disclosure requirement.
Yes, obviously. Thank you. Thank you for that comment. So if I understand correctly, you're both in favor of having a robust process between the company and the auditors, so that the auditors are put in the loop pretty quickly and not wait till the end, so that there is, it's in the learning curve, everybody is working together to a common goal of having a robust sustainability reporting.
Oh.
Thank you very much. Looking at the question, there is a question from Adia. I guess this is more for you, Emmanuel. I have one question regarding the opportunities your organizations offer for international students, but this is something I will let you answer separately because it's not connected with the webinar. And thank you very much, Alexia. I see your comment regarding the FRC in the UK, which recommends price blind tenders in its minimum standards. Always very interesting practices brought by the FRC. Well, I think we have to wait a while to see this being implemented in at least in those first years in terms of exercise. Any final word from you two? We have a little bit 3 minutes left, Daniela and Emmanuel, and then we can close the webinar. Emmanuel?
Well, I think 2024 is going to be an exciting year with the introduction of CSRD. At least on my side, I know it's going to keep me quite busy, maybe a little too much. And I think it's very important to keep in mind that a proper collaboration and cooperation between the auditee and the auditor is also the key for better reporting. They are maybe one ask from the board members is also to show a little bit of understanding for the position of the auditors, who are also in the learning curve to some extent and are also on the same journey to help improve the quality of the ESG information.
Thank you very much. Daniela, final word?
Yes, I think there is, I think in the most boards, a huge understanding of the learning curve, because we are all
Thank you.
We are all sitting on the same, we are on the same page, I would say. Honestly, I think it's quite exciting. So there are risks for sure. But it's exciting. I didn't knew that in my professional career I have the chance to get into a topic which is completely new, and in that detail. So I think it's exciting also to playing a role as a board member in that transformation. So I'm excited.
No, definitely. I think it's thank you for adding a very positive touch to this discussion. And definitely, let's just remind us that it's not purely a reporting exercise, but it should also transform in terms of how we review the business model, the way we operate, the strategy at companies. And ESG should not be a siloed topic, but really a topic which is well embedded into the everyday way of working at companies, designing products, operating, and so on. So This will conclude our webinar. Thank you very much. You were a lot of you remaining till the end. So thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for the questions. And I hope we'll have the pleasure to propose you another webinar on these topics once we have a little bit more insight, I would say, and after 1 or 2 years of experience in terms of how the pricing, the practices in the selections will go. This will make for an interesting topic. Beatrice, if you want to say something.
Just to thank you, Anne-Hélène, Daniela, and Emmanuel. It was a fantastic webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you both, and have a nice day to everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, Anna Helena, she's also out, huh?
Yeah. Bye-bye.